Hello everyone and welcome back. We are ranking the Akatsuki from weakest to strongest, this time part 2. Before I even continue, I want to start by thanking anyone who saw part 1. If you haven't seen part 1, make sure to go check that out, or don't, just focus on the second half of the Akatsuki, whichever you prefer. But if you're curious of where a certain Akatsuki member is, if they're not here, they're most likely in part 1. I also went over Hebi, if that interests you too, aka Taka. This is now my second video, and I hope that it's slightly better than the first in terms of quality. Same as the previous video, I will only be going over the versions that were part of the Akatsuki, so obviously no Nagato, no Jubito, just the ones that were part of the Akatsuki. And as far as video game feats go, I'll leave a note on screen so you know which feats to take a grain of salt with. We're mostly going to be talking about the feats of the legacy of the Akatsuki. Those are the only video game feats I will be pulling up here and there. Again, I will leave a message on the screen to let you know that it's a video game feat, and if you don't want to take those into consideration, that's completely fine. Again, I am always up to be swayed on these opinions. I'm not the be-all and end-all of Akatsuki tiering, so if you believe someone's stronger and you got some evidence to throw at me, I would love to have my mind changed. Again, I would like to be educated, not just, spit out my own opinion and try to claim it as fact. Anyways, let's just dive into this. Now, I understand that I'm probably the first person, or one of the only, to put her above Kakuzu, let alone Deidara and Sasori, but let me explain. Keep in mind that Konan really only has 2 fights, against Jiraiya for 2 seconds, and the god tier Obito. So let's start with the battle against Jiraiya. Now let me say that I believe Jiraiya can beat all the Akatsuki members I've stated up to this point, yes, including Kakuzu. So it's pretty interesting already that Konan is able to fight this person, and he's pervy god after all. It's interesting to note that she exchanged the clash with him and won. The only reason Jiraiya got ahead was due to the oil technique, which was a hard counter, so she couldn't really do anything about that. Unfortunately, when it comes to the Jiraiya battle, that's kind of all we have to go off of, since I imagine Kishimoto just wanted to get to the spicy pain fight already, so I don't blame him. But now let's talk about the Obito battle, and I want to talk about a specific statement that drives me mad. Yes, the faded "I underestimated her" statement. How? Look, I don't know if it's just me, but besides Pain, wouldn't Obito be the only guy who knows what she's capable of? How can he underestimate her any less than any other Akatsuki member would? Is this kind of odd because Obito's the one who kind of, works above her? You're the leader of the Akatsuki. Shouldn't you know everything that these guys are capable of? But Konan, for some reason, I'm supposed to believe is the only exception. So here's my theory. Either Obito is lying to himself, or Konan purposely was very contained in showing her skills. If the second is true, then Konan would still have an advantage, because if Obito fell for it, then I'm sure the other Akatsuki would too, even more probably than Obito would have. The only guys I could see not really falling for her shtick is like Hitachi and Sasori, since they're not arrogant, they're a lot more, calculated and not as cocky. With that out of the way, I'd like to actually dive into the battle, starting with the feat that she reacted to Kamui. I've heard of people downplaying this, saying that she already had this planned and predicted, so it doesn't really count. But no, that's not how it works. She'd have to do it in a reasonable enough time for Obito not to react and not just dodge it. She moved fast enough where Obito had to rely to the Kamui, and she had enough time to get out of it. It still counts as a feat just because she predicted it. If you don't believe me, it's kind of a theme Kishimoto throws out all the time. We can look all the way back at the fight between Sasuke and Rock Lee. And yes, I understand that both of them are significantly weaker than Obito and Konan, but the theme stands. Sasuke can see what Rock Lee was going to do, but there was nothing he could do about it because he wasn't fast enough, which means that the gap between Sasuke and Lee is smaller than the gap between Konan and Obito. And even if I'm not saying Konan is fast as Obito, I'm saying that she's fast enough to dodge the Kamui. That's all I'm saying, which is already way more impressive than any speed feats that we've seen any of the other Akatsuki members do. Let's look at the truth. Obito was in the club of guys who got back so hard they used a hack. He's alongside Hitachi in that club when he fought Kabuto, and the plot just needed to find a way for Obito to live. Do you honestly see Kakuzu or Deidara catching Obito off guard and almost killing him? No way, dude. That's something that Konan is exclusively able to do in comparison to the people before him. I do not see Deidara or Kakuzu ever getting this close to defeating Obito. If all that doesn't convince you, then let's look at the whole splitting the sea thing. Konan doesn't have telekinesis to our knowledge. She can't just lift rocks and, like lift trees with basically psychic powers. She has to move the sea with her own force. Basically the force of all these papers, right? So it's not really crazy to assume that Konan would just be able to one-shot any of the Akatsuki members by wrapping paper around them and just crushing them, basically like a sand coffin, except she'd be able to move the papers a lot quicker. I do understand that Konan did have prep time to defeat Obito, but look at how many she made. She does not need to make that many. And the only reason she used that prep time is because she was fighting Obito, someone who had a Kamui that would last that long. It's perfect for them. She wouldn't need to make billions for everyone else on the Akatsuki that we've mentioned so far. Then we have the fact that people want to say that Konan was only in the team because she was Pain's friend, so she wasn't really a interested member. One, that's speculation. We don't know that if Konan and Pain weren't friends, she wouldn't have been sought after. And second, you do realize Hidan's in the team, right? And he's kind of fodder, so I wouldn't really use that. And finally, we do have the Storm Revolution feat. Again, it's a video game feat. Just want to point that out there, so you can ignore it if you can. But if you do want to take this into consideration, she bodied Sasori pretty hard. That's all I wanted to say about Konan. Let's put some respect on the best Naruto waifu in the series, and I will not hear otherwise. Alright everyone, now we got everyone's favorite sus snake. So first, let's talk about the obvious. He pretty much wrestled the Four Tails like it was an AEW match.
Not on the outside. Oh, no, wait. Hold on. The blackout through the table.
Now the reason Orochimaru is so high is based off one thing that I'll get to a little later. But first, let's talk about how he just stabs the Four Tails and swings him across the forest like a damn shish kebab, which at the time was super crazy to see a character perform a feat at this scale at least. Another thing to note is that he seems to be consistently stronger than Jiraiya, just scaling off the tailed beast. It's also implied that he did defeat him once to, leave the village. I know that's not concrete evidence, and a lot of people think that he defeated Jiraiya in base or Sage Mode, but regardless, he was able to defeat Jiraiya, regardless of what form he was in. Jiraiya gets all the credit when Pain says that he would have beat all 7, which I disagree with, but if Jiraiya can get all that credit for doing that, then the fact that Orochimaru defeated Jiraiya, that means he should get all of that credit as well. If you don't want to talk about Storm Revolution, Orochimaru's only L really is by Sasuke when he was sick and dying. I guess you could bring up Hitachi, but he did just kind of catch him with a genjutsu and that was it. I don't think it was both of them were ready to fight and go. He just caught him with a genjutsu that Orochimaru was not expecting Hitachi to hit him with, and he won that fight. But as in a one-on-one fight, start to finish, Orochimaru really has not lost. Unless, again, you want to bring up Storm Revolution and bring up the fact that Pain defeated him with an almighty push really easily. This guy's a freak of nature. And it's important to note that Orochimaru expressed the ability to actually defeat Itachi's Susanoo, if not for the Totsuka Blade and Yadomir. His reaction to seeing the Susanoo was more like it's the Totsuka Blade, not so much, it's the Susanoo. He seemed pretty confident that he would have been able to defeat the Susanoo. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, that definitely seals this spot here, because the 8-headed serpent, I believe it's what it is extremely powerful if it's able to defeat the Susanoo. If not, then maybe you could argue Konan based off feats should be higher, but if that's true, if with the 8-headed serpent he can defeat the Susanoo minus the Totsuka Blade, then yeah, there's no arguing that Konan could beat Orochimaru. She would get mollywopped. There would be nothing she could do to damage him in that state. I don't think there would be anything she could do even if he's not stronger than the Susanoo. So there we go. That's pretty much all I gotta say aside from other obvious things such as the fact that he can heal himself, the Rashomon walls. He's an absolute fiend. Nothing more that needs to be said about Orochimaru.
Man, delete that shit, bro. Delete it.
Now this is the one that's probably going to drive people mad. Now before I'm crucified by the Itachi fanboys, I just want to clarify that I am talking about the Itachi that fought Sasuke. I am not talking about reanimated Itachi, and I'm not talking about Itachi when he was healed. The reason I'm not talking about healed Itachi is because we don't know enough about him. We kind of have an idea of how strong he is. He beat Orochimaru, but I honestly think it's an outlier. Although I do think Itachi being healed can beat Orochimaru, the ease in which he did it I don't think would happen every single time. Itachi caught him with a genjutsu. I feel that, like I said before, if they were like battle ready, it wouldn't be exactly the same. But Itachi's still powerful, even sick. So I'm talking about that Itachi before everyone goes crazy. Of course, I think reanimated Itachi would probably beat everyone on the list, so that's just my take on it. Same goes for like other versions like Nagato and Jubito. So sick Itachi is going to go right here, and I'm about to go into why. Number 1, Itachi has a lot of jutsu. From the exploding shadow clones, to the Amaterasu, to the Tsukuyomi, all that lovely stuff. Even though he's sick, he's still able to pull this stuff off. Amaterasu, super deadly. You get hit by it once, you're pretty much done for. I mean, like, if you hit Orochimaru with it, I'm sure he'd be able to, like, shed out of it, but it's not like it's not going to do tons of damage. Then you got the Tsukuyomi. I'm going to get into real quick Sasuke avoiding the Tsukuyomi. I know a lot of people say Itachi let him out of the Tsukuyomi or he didn't. The truth is we don't have any concrete evidence on that. That's all speculation. If you want to say Tsukuyomi one-shots anyone and you can't get out of it, okay, fine, sure. But I'm more leaning towards Sasuke escaped it on his own. I'm sure there are ways you can argue Itachi's higher on the list. I'm not doubting that. However, I'm trying to argue him being lower just to make things a little more interesting. I do think that the others are stronger, but I'm not totally opposed to Itachi being higher on the list. But let's talk about the most important thing. It's the Susanoo. It's pretty much everyone's trump card when talking about Itachi, and I don't blame them. The Susanoo is hard-hitting, it's a tank, it can pretty much do anything. It has the Totsuka Blade and the Yatamir, two things we're going to get into really quick. First of all, the Totsuka Blade. It's the one-shot weapon while the Yatamir blocks everything. So already having those titles to your weapons is super crazy as it is. I will say that it's not entirely perfect though. The Yatamir is not omnidirectional. He does have to move around and block attacks, so if you're fast enough to get behind him and strong enough to pierce his Susanoo, you'll probably be able to do a lot of damage, if not just flat out win once you get through those defenses. And then there's the Totsuka Blade, which I argue, again, you do need to make a direct stab. Like against Orochimaru, he couldn't seal him by cutting the little heads. He had to kind of like pierce Orochimaru himself to seal him inside the thing. Like, I don't think if you stab Nagato's summonings, you would be able to seal Nagato. You have to stab Nagato. So in other words, if you're stabbing Sasori's puppets, I doubt it'd work. You'd have to stab Sasori. You know what I'm trying to get at. Itachi, the reason I'm keeping him short is because a lot of the arguments about Itachi have already been made. I don't think that a lot of people are going to argue that this Itachi can't take a lot of damage. I mean, I think like one lariat from like B or the Raikage would honestly kill him. And I'm not saying B and Raikage could beat sick Itachi. I'm just saying that if he did take a hit from any of them, they'd probably die or they'd end up like Sasuke when he fought Killer B. On top of all this, he can't even keep the Susanoo on forever, so you don't even have to necessarily destroy the Susanoo. You have to outlive it. And that's not too difficult. The Susanoo is pretty fast, but I wouldn't say it's like a speedster or anything. So as long as you're faster than the Susanoo, you should be in the clear. Wait for Itachi to run out of said Susanoo, and you should be good. I know that I'm not making the Susanoo not seem like a big deal, but in comparison to the other guys, I honestly don't think it is. Itachi, without the Susanoo being sick, he is impressive, but he does struggle a lot with Sasuke, who he himself struggled a ton with Deidara. And if he's like relative to Deidara, and I know people aren't going to like me saying that, but he is relative to Deidara considering his performance against Sasuke, it shows that Itachi being sick does truly hinder his skills. Now again, healed Itachi, obviously, completely different story. I won't know at the top of my head right now, but I'm sure he'd be higher on the list. Why wouldn't he be? Then there's the whole argument that Obito was afraid of Itachi, and that's why he didn't attack the Leaf Village, which is honestly a bunch of nonsense. Obito is very calculated. He was just waiting for Itachi to die and then make a move on the village, just to avoid conflict. There's no point in doing it if he already knew he was going to die. So that's pretty much my take on Itachi. There you go. But actually, real quick, before I even end Itachi's conversation, no, Jiraiya cannot defeat Itachi. I'm not going to hear that stupid statement Kisame made. That was a long time ago. I'm sure Kishimoto had different plans of how strong Jiraiya, Itachi, and Kisame were going to be back then. I mean, you honestly think he planned for Kisame to be as strong as he is? So no, Itachi would body Jiraiya, even sick. I don't want to hear it. Next up, we got the edgelord himself, the best rival in all of anime, and I will not hear otherwise. It's Sasuke. So I know most people will be unhappy that he is higher than Itachi on the list, but Itachi had quite a bit of trouble with Sasuke in their battle. A weaker Sasuke, might I add. He did not have the Susanoo. Of course, he was fighting the same Sasuke that, like I said before, fought Deidara. It's weird because when people talk about Susanoo Sasuke, a lot of people don't bring up Kirin, like if he somehow lost the technique, and I know it's filler when he uses it in the final arc, but there's no indication that Sasuke should have lost Kirin. So I don't know why Kirin isn't brought up, and a lot of the times when people talk about Susanoo Sasuke. And I personally feel like this Sasuke in particular is severely downplayed. Sasuke, much like Itachi, has the ultimate offense and ultimate defense. Now, I know a lot of people bring up the Totsuka Blade and the Yata Mirror, that they're better than Sasuke's base Susanoo armor and his bow and arrow. However, I'd argue that for most people, the bow and arrow is going to be a one-shot regardless, and it's a projectile unlike the Totsuka Blade. So for fighting the Akatsuki members, I would argue that the bow and arrow is actually a better tool than the Totsuka Blade. As far as the Yata Mirror goes, yes, that is a better tool than Sasuke's defenses, but it doesn't really matter if Itachi can't do anything to defeat him. The reason that is because I believe that since the Totsuka Blade needs to pierce an important part of someone's body, that obviously can't happen if Sasuke is being protected by the Susanoo. To our knowledge, the Totsuka Blade does not have the ability to pass through objects, so it's just a giant sword basically for the Susanoo that just so happens to one-shot. Then you have the shield versus the bow and arrow, which I guess would be a good matchup. He can block a lot of these arrows and stuff like that. But I would argue that if you want to make the argument that the Totsuka Blade can pass through objects because it's an astral weapon, I'd argue that the bow and arrow is also an astral weapon, so they'd be able to pass through the Yata Mirror. It gets a little shaky, so to not have this be so confusing, I'm arguing that none of them are astral weapons, and Totsuka Blade cannot pierce through Sasuke's Susanoo. Taking Susanoo's out of the equation, I would argue that Sasuke that fought the 5 Kage is way stronger than the Itachi that fought back when he was sick, so I don't even think that's a competition. He basically went through a gauntlet of the Kage while he was mentally checked out too. Remember that Sasuke was engulfed by revenge, so he wasn't even at the best state of mind during all this. Sasuke went toe-to-toe with the Raikage, and he's able to create a small version of the Susanoo, of course, just like the Ribcage, where he's able to survive the Liger Bomb by the Raikage, something I think Itachi would have no hope in surviving. He then even gets stronger later on and is able to fight Danzo, and not only does the gauntlet consist of the Kage itself, after he even kills Danzo, he has to fight his own sensei, and even after that, he still has enough energy to clash with Naruto, the same Naruto that has gotten way stronger after training with the Toads. Like, if you honestly think Itachi's versatile, Sasuke's even more versatile. He has all these like Chidori abilities and whatnot, and again there's the Kirin, so even if by some miracle he runs out of chakra, he can still use Kirin, which is super powerful. Sasuke is just a monster, and his speed seems to be really incredible. He's able to like clash with Mifune, which granted Mifune isn't all that impressive, but it's something, especially while after being fatigued by fighting the Raikage. Kisame is an absolute unit, and I don't hear enough people talking about the fact that he is. To me, he's kind of on that train with Conan of just underrated Akatsuki members. Now, when I was looking around forums, I actually didn't see a lot of comparisons between Kisame and Sick Itachi, and hopefully that's because we all agree that Kisame would win that fight. Let's look at the first obvious thing that Kisame does that's worth note, and that's bodying Killer Bee. And I don't mean just bodying, he dogged this man. He embarrassed him. I mean, here you have a guy in B who like had no trouble fighting all of Taka. And mind you, I'm not saying that Killer B is stronger than Hitachi, but the fact that he just like bodied Sasuke when in comparison, Sasuke was doing pretty good against Hitachi, a sick Hitachi, shows that Kisame is just an entirely different tier above like the members of Taka and Killer B himself. Then we can talk about Kisame's 30% water clone that fought all of Team Guy with no difficulty. Now, I understand that Neji, Lee, and Tenten aren't exactly anything impressive or powerful, but, you know, they're decent. They're like all these, like, Jonin level characters, except for Tenten, and Kisame is just able to put these guys in water prisons, no problem. Keep in mind that the Kisame that did all this was just not even half his power. It was a clone. In the same way that Naruto made a clone to fight the third Raikage, this was what Kisame was doing. Lee is the kind of guy who fought like Gaara. We don't know how much stronger he got in Shippuden, but it's a stronger Lee. And the fact that he basically just got one-shotted by Kisame via water prison is really impressive. In this 30% clone, he's able to flood the entire battlefield. They're like in this wasteland, and he just makes this vortex of water that they really don't have a lot of answers to. I mean, we're talking about a guy who took a lariat and had his entire rib cage ripped out of him, and he thought it was funny. He thought it was funny as hell. He didn't even worry about it. He was just like having a great time. Tell me sick Itachi would be able to survive the lariat like that. He absolutely wouldn't. The same Kisame, while having no chakras, being half dead, took an attack from KCM Naruto and broke out of Yamato's wood prison with sheer power alone. Then this guy goes toe-to-toe with Seven Gates Guy with no chakra and damn near dead, and he performs pretty darn good. The only reason Seven Gates Guy even won that encounter was because the Hirodora was a hard counter to Kisame. Like, Kisame was confident that if the Hirodora was ninjutsu, he would have had that fight in the bag. And that's Seven Gates Guy. The same Seven Gates Guy whose Hirodora can just like grab the Susanoo and drag it across the battlefield. That's insane. And that's all without even getting to his transformed state. My god, what a freak of nature. My man is exactly the same, but way faster, and he gets a giant water dome that follows him everywhere he goes. There's where I rest my case that Kisame is next on the list. Then we have the Revolution battle. Again, the video game feat. If you don't want to take it, that's fine. He did escape one of Itachi's genjutsu. Granted, it's not like Tsukuyomi or anything, but it's pretty impressive that he has any genjutsu resistance at all. And it is Itachi's after all. It's pretty crazy. So that's pretty much it. We're going to get to the top two, which are pretty much the two anyone will pick. And this is probably going to get people upset also. So here we go. Alright guys, so now we have Obito Uchiha. So let's talk about the best stuff out of the way. Of course, we have the Kamui. If you do not have a good counter against said move, the battle is going to be very hard. It's going to be way harder than if you did. I'm not saying there isn't counters to Kamui, but most people just don't have them. So Obito is generally a good matchup for most opponents. Now we're going to talk about Obito's speed feats, which he has two really good ones, and they're both around the same time. So the first one is the Raikage. When he goes to try to strike Obito, Obito is fast enough to move out of the way. Of course, Raikage is so fast he's able to dodge the Amaterasu. And then we have his feat of going in and out of Onoki's particle style, which is insane. He was able to go in there and grab Sasuke and get out before the attack can even end. So basically, Onoki uses the attack after he goes in, and then he gets out before the attack finishes, which is even crazier. Keep in mind that the Raikage is a lot more relative to KCM Naruto, at least KCM 1 Naruto, than you guys might think. So the Raikage, of course, was blitzed by Naruto, but that was one time. It's kind of an outlier. There was more times Raikage hit him than Naruto dodged, so I think they're a lot more relative. I still think KCM Naruto is faster, but it's not a gap that's that large, and the fact that Obito was able to dodge that attack puts him at around that same ballpark with KCM Naruto. That already puts his speed way higher than that of Itachi and Kisame. Then there's also the fact that Obito pretty much no-diffed the likes of Fu and Tarun, who were Danzo's right-hand men, so that's pretty impressive. He beat them no problem. The next thing I want to bring up is his fight with Minato, which a lot of people like to highball or whatnot. And even though Minato is a monster, I think that Obito's performance here isn't all that impressive. Yes, Minato had the right counter, so it doesn't really speak negatively to Obito, but I don't think the fight itself speaks too positively to Obito either. I'm going to keep Obito kind of short because I will talk about him more when I get to our number 1, so I can directly compare them and get more into detail. So we're kind of going to stop here with Obito. Then he has Kamui, of course. It's his big thing. Obviously, the attack is pretty busted, so I will get to that when I get to our number 1. So let's just go ahead and jump into that so we can wrap this up. So we have finally arrived to the number 1 on the ranking of the Akatsuki. So let's get the odd statements out of the way. One of the statements that a lot of people like to bring up is that Minato said that Obito was stronger than Pain. However, this isn't actually ever stated. He's more implying that he's more dangerous, and it's true. Obito's the mastermind of the series. He is the one with the grand plan, so it makes sense that Minato would view him as the bigger threat. I'll admit, I don't know if in the manga it's a different statement, but in the anime at least, Minato never says this. He never even implies Obito can defeat Pain in a fight. So now that we got that statement out of the way, let's talk about how much of a monster Pain actually is. To do this, we gotta obviously start with the 6 paths technique. It's kind of his big thing. Pain can steal souls, spam powerful summons, have missiles, repel, and bring anything he wants, absorb jutsu, summon the King of Hell, and that's without even including other things he has like the chakra rods and shared vision between all the members. That is a handful of abilities. Now people will bring up Kamui, and I don't think it's that simple. It's like me arguing that Pain can beat anyone because he can steal their souls. That's kind of how I view Kamui. Now people would argue that Pain can't remove someone so quickly if they have a high power level, but I'd argue that the meta Naruto is more based on doesn't really support that. I think that the meta of Naruto is a little different than, say, like Dragon Ball. I think Pain can truly remove anyone's soul. The reason, I think, is because it's about more chakra, not about a power level of someone. So the reason it took so long taking it out from Naruto and B is because they are tailed beasts. They naturally have far more chakra than anyone else. And I don't think many would argue that Obito has as much chakra as Naruto. So it would be easier for him to remove Obito's soul than it would be to remove Naruto's. I'd argue that a lot of the paths are heavily downplayed. The Asura path is actually stronger than Kakuzu alone, and I can prove this. This path alone basically was strong enough to defeat Jiraiya. Like, it took one punch from Jiraiya and it was like done for. Meanwhile, Choji took multiple strikes from Kakuzu, making his attack potency already greater. Then you have the fact that he's fast enough to get right in front of Kakashi's Raikiri when Kakashi blitzed Kakuzu. So he's faster than him also, and he survived the attack in comparison to Kakuzu, who lost one of the hearts. The Asura path is no joke. On top of that, he has ranged attacks. So it's a lot of trouble. The fact that he was able to get in front of this lightning blade just scales him to like Rock Lee speed, and I know that's going to get people triggered, but it's true. His physical strikes are insane also, like one strike and it's like bye-bye data. So if the main Pain and the Asura path don't sound threatening enough, we also have the Animal path, who's able to just spam these giant summons. The Animal path is so strong that I'd argue she's like the best summoner in the series in contention with Naruto and Jiraiya. Again, if you want to keep going, the Absorption path is stupid fast. It's able to move in front of Pain and absorb the jutsu that was going to attack him. The Soul path is fast as hell. It's able to get the Animal path out of the way of the Rasen Shuriken. They're all really fast. Pain has great durability also, the main one I'm talking about, as the Seven Tails was able to just smack him around, and he just ate these attacks. And he's able to like block incoming attacks also with like the small little almighty push barriers, which is also really impressive. Like, Pain is just another monster altogether. I mean, like, even if Obito grabs Pain with the Kamui, like, what's he gonna do? Let the puppet of Pain starve forever? Then people want to say, oh, Minato would body Pain. Okay, Minato also bodied Obito. Pretty badly, might I add. That's it, man. So there's my ranking of the Akatsuki, and that's why I believe Pain is the strongest one. Also, Obito catching Pain with Kamui is going to be a little difficult because, check this out.
Almighty push!
Thank you guys so much for watching. I just started the channel and I just started power scaling and debating in general, so I'm really excited for this. If you guys love the video, please like and subscribe. Follow me on my social medias, the generic stuff. But thank you guys so much. Again, I'm not the be-all, end-all. I don't claim to be the word of God when it comes to Naruto. I'm totally open to having a debate and having my mind changed. So make sure you guys message me on any of my social media platforms or comment down below, and I'll try to get to you so we can have a debate. So thank you guys. Bye.